urging an Accra High Court to dismiss a case filed by the suspended Chief Justice Gertrude Tokono. Now, documents filed in court by the Deputy Attorney General, Dr. Justice Shemsai, argues that the matters raised by the Chief Justice have been dealt with or remain pending at the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice has, in the last few weeks, urged the Supreme Court and now the High Court to halt her removal process. Now, this action by the Chief Justice is a sixth legal action filed in court since the presidency announced the receipt of petitions against the Chief Justice. My colleague Joseph Akablame is joining me in the studio. He's a legal affairs correspondent to get details of exactly what the Deputy Attorney General filed in court today. What do we know, Joseph?
So we know that the Chief Justice filed this action after her initial push at the Supreme Court did not succeed. You recall that was the very first time the Chief Justice had herself taken a matter over to the Supreme Court. She filed an affidavit in which she made series of allegations. And when it went over to the Supreme Court took the view that those affidavits disclosed matters that fell within the proceedings that took place at the committee. And so the court struck out those affidavits. Her request for the proceedings to be put on hold was also not upheld by the court. Now, and after all of that, she now filed a process at the High Court. In fact, the very first time we heard of this process that has been filed at the High Court was disclosed by the Chief Justice herself. In that press conference that she addressed, she did indicate that she had instructed her lawyers to file a judicial review action challenging some of the matters that have taken place at the committee hearing. In effect, what she's seeking is for those proceedings to be put on hold. Key amongst her concerns has to do with the fact that she says up until now she has not received a ruling or a determination, the prima facie determination. She's yet to receive it, so she does not know which aspects of the petitions filed against her have crossed the prima facie threshold and which of the allegations have not. And so she's basically showed up at the committee, and all she's responding to are the matters that were given to her, for which she provided response to at the initial level, even before the committee was set up. So she doesn't even know whether her copies that she has is the same thing that the Chief Justice the committee also has in its possession. And those are all matters that she has put in the document that she has taken over to the High Court. Now, the Deputy Attorney General has responded on behalf of the Republic and makes the point strongly that those matters that are being raised by the Chief Justice are matters that have been dealt with by the Supreme Court or they remain pending at the Supreme Court. In fact, they list the 5 other cases that have been filed at the Supreme Court so far. I'm going to run you through the case titles so far. So the first one is the case that was filed by the Chief Justice herself, not the first in time, but in terms of the list as put out in the court documents by the Attorney General, Her Ladyship Justice Gertrude Araba Esaba Tokonu versus the Attorney General and 5 others. The suit number is provided there. Then Center for Citizenship, Constitutional Electoral Systems, LBG versus Attorney General and 2 others. Then there is Vincent Ekoasefua versus Attorney General, Ebenezer Osei Owusu versus Attorney General, and Theodore Kofi Atakorte versus Attorney General. So those are the 5 cases that the AG makes reference to make the point that these are cases in which the same matters have been urged on the court. And the court has either dealt with it or the matter remains pending at the Supreme Court. And so you cannot come back to the High Court or come down to the High Court, the lower court, and ask the High Court to pronounce on those same matters, especially when they've either been dealt with or they remain pending. And so they are basically asking the High Court to strike out the judicial review action that has been filed by the Chief Justice. And
essentially, what then how is it going to impact on the proceedings, especially at the Supreme Court? Because you indicate that the Deputy Attorney General, in filing today, indicates that there are some of the issues that are pending at the Supreme Court already. Does this development have any consequence whatsoever on the process at the Supreme Court as filed already?
In fact, what we do not know is whether the request that was made to the High Court by the Chief Justice, whether it includes an application for injunction or not. We also know that the Supreme Court, in that recent decision, dealt with the issues of whether an application ought to stop a constitutional body from performing its function. We know that in one of the concurring opinion, Justice Emmanuel Yonikulendi makes the point quite strongly that as far as he's concerned, he thinks that the distinction needs to be made when it comes to constitutional functions. Such an application should not stop the committee from hearing it. What we can say for a fact is that This particular application has been filed by the Attorney General. It's slated for hearing on Tuesday, the 15th of July, 2025. The request to the High Court to strike out the application that has been filed by the Chief Justice. So we'd have to look up onto that day to know what will transpire in court in terms of the concerns that may be raised by the Attorney General or lawyers for the Chief Justice.
Now, stay with me, Joseph. Let's bring in Lawrence Wong, who is a private legal practitioner as well. Counsel, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Mr. Counsel.
Now,
thanks for the pleasure.
Perfect. Now, you heard my colleague and also a senior legal affairs correspondent, Joseph Akabale, lay the basis for the Chief Justice's this application at the High Court. The Deputy Attorney General is making the point that the matters raised by the CJ, the suspended Chief Justice, have already been dealt with or remain pending at the Supreme Court. I mean, does this position have any merit as against what the CJ is asking for right now?
Yes, Mr. Counsel. Thank you for the opportunity once again. And let me say good evening to your cherished listeners. Yes, I've looked at the affidavit in support of the application that has been filed by the Deputy AG. And he makes the case that the matters pending before the Supreme Court has a bearing on the application for judicial review by Her Ladyship, the Chief Justice. Yes, because the matter is pending, I wouldn't want to go into the merit, but let me just say that the matter before the High Court is for judicial review. And when we talk about judicial review, simply put, it means that when you look at our Constitution, Article 141, the High Court has what we call supervisory jurisdiction over all lower courts and lower adjudicating bodies. So the committee for this matter involving Her Ladyship is exercising a judicial function, quasi-judicial. Therefore, the High Court has that supervisory jurisdiction over that committee. And I have not seen the application which has been filed by the suspended Chief Justice. However, my understanding is that she is before the High Court because it is the proper forum when you want to go for any relief in the nature of judicial review. That is for sexual right. If you want to quash the process or the proceedings before the committee. We all heard her speak to the nation and she complained about certain acts, such as, a breach of her natural justice, fair hearing and all that, human rights matters. So it is a proper forum. As to whether the issues in her affidavit in support for a relief in judicial review has a bearing with the matters before the Supreme Court, it's for the High Court to determine. Though, let me be quick to state that we all know, and this is known by everybody who has been following these matters, that some of the things that she complained about in the Supreme Court, in her own case, the one that she was the applicant, she made mention of some of these issues. It is also a fact that some of the things that she said in her supplementary affidavit were struck out by the Supreme Court. So those are not matters which are still pending before the Supreme Court, because that matter has been dealt with. There's a ruling on it. So that is what I can say to that question.
She's always contended, and this was even at the press conference last week, that she doesn't have a copy of the prima facie against her, and she doesn't even know whether the copies of the petitions that she has is the same that the committee that she has appeared before them really has, and being employed in the process of the hearing against her. Now, is it a legitimate suspicion to have that the details of the petition she has will be different from what the committee is having? Does it have any basis whatsoever?
Yes, Mr. Kanji, sometimes it's difficult to answer some of these questions because, the committee has no spokesperson to, respond to this matter. However, what we all do know is that the Chief Justice herself admits that she wrote a letter to His Excellency the President requesting for copies of the petitions against her. So I find it difficult to understand if she's complaining that she doesn't have those petitions. It's quite difficult for me to understand that. Further, during her press conference, she told the whole nation the content of the petition. So she has always had the petitions. So for me, respectfully, I do not believe that the petition is the issue. All three petitions, she told us the content, which suggests that she has in her custody copies of the petition. So it is difficult for me to see that as an issue. I understand her complaining that when she appeared before the committee, they have not given her copies. But we don't know she already has copies. So that for me is a bit difficult for me to comprehend.
But how do you see things playing out? I mean, the Deputy Attorney General filed on behalf of the state asking that the High Court strikes out this particular case. Is it one that you see playing out this way, or as it were, the court will now have to determine whether the details or the reliefs that she's seeking in this supplementary affidavit has any impact on what she's seeking at the Supreme Court, essentially?
Okay, so this is how I see the High Court going about it. You know, she has brought an application in the nature of judicial review, and that application will be supported by an affidavit. In the affidavit, she will depose to the things that, in her view, okay, she sees as breaches, whether of natural justice or whatever. Then the court is going to have the opportunity to also listen to the Attorney General. Don't forget, what the AG has filed now is not in response to her application. It is another application to set aside, you get it, to strike out her application for judicial review. So the Attorney General will have an affidavit in opposition to counter the argument that has been canvassed by her ladyship. And the court will be called upon to weigh the two, to look at her depositions and marry that with that of the AG. Where there are merit in it, that will form the basis of granting the application or refusing it. I hope you get it.
I get the point. I think it's pretty, yes.
This is a separate motion which has been filed by the AG, okay? And he's also saying that he wants to strike out what has already been filed by the CJ based on certain reasons which he has deposed to them in the affidavit. So the court is going to look at it. So the two applications will come on that day. And by practice, because this current one, that the motion we are discussing, the motion on notice for an order to strike out the application for judicial review was recently filed, that will be taken before the application for judicial review.
It's going to be a day to watch. I mean, this case is expected to be heard on the 15th of this month. So I'm sure how the coming days will look like. We'll certainly connect with you again, Counsel. And I do appreciate your thoughts and analysis on this particular issue. Thank you so much.
You are most welcome.
Perfect. That's private legal practitioner Lawrence Boampong Reko joining us with his thoughts on the Chief Justice, the suspended Chief Justice. Now, what we're learning is that the Attorney General is urging an Accra High Court to dismiss a case filed by Her Ladyship Geto Tukono. Documents filed in court by the Deputy Attorney General, Dr. Justice Shamsai, argues that the matters raised by the Chief Justice have been dealt with or remain pending at the Supreme Court. Now, this also comes on the back of what a political party is asking of Otumfuo Osei II. What do we know?
Well, they are petitioning the Asantehene, and these people are the People's National Party, over what it describes as unlawful suspension and human rights abuses against the Chief Justice Gertrude Araba Isaba Tukono. And we'll be getting across to our correspondent to get more details on this very soon. Alfred?
Indeed. But then again, before we connect, this is what Janet Nabila, who is the leader of this group, this political party, has been talking about with regards to this petition to 246 to the second.
Political parties are supposed to run a country. And to run a country, whatever is happening to the Chief Justice is not part of running the country. We have seen that as an abuse, not only on the Chief Justice, but the women of Ghana. We see what the NDC, John Mahama administration, whatever they are doing to the woman as an abuse of power. And we think that since all protocols are no longer working, our justice system has become an annex of political parties. We decided that we will come to Mensia Palace because we know that our tradition has already shown us. They were there before this democracy we inherited came along. So if our democracy is not working, we will go back to our roots and ask the chiefs, who are the custodians of the land, to tell the Mahama government, who is just renting part of the land to operate, to call him to order. So today we are here we've presented our petition. We've cried about whatever violations are emitting out to the Chief Justice. We've outlined them in the petition, and we have given it to Otumfuo's secretary, custodians of the land, to tell the Mahama government, who is just renting part of the land to operate, to call him to order. So today we are here we've presented our petition. We've cried about whatever violations are emitting out to the Chief Justice. We've outlined them in the petition, and we have given it to Otumfuo's secretary.
As Janet Nabila there.
Let's do some more stories. And the Ministry of Health has